Hello everybody and welcome to the first part of the C++ beginner tutorial. This is the part I'm sure everybody has been waiting for, as it actually we're going to finally get into coding after installing the IDE. So to begin with here, we're going to be doing code structure in this episode. That's the syntax of the programming language C++. And you can think of the code structure sort of like punctuation and grammar in English. So when you're writing a book, you need a period at the end of every sentence or a question mark, and this is very similar to that. It's just a set of rules that the compiler knows how to read. Now, before we get any further, I did want to explain like how a compiler works. Now, when you're writing code to a machine, C++, the machine doesn't know how to read that by itself. So what you do is we made these programming languages to make it simpler for humans to program them, because they're a lot more like English. And then the compiler, it'll take all of that programming language that you made and then convert it or translate it into machine code, something that the machine can read. And then it outputs that, and that's what you can use as a runnable program. Now, when this compiler is reading through the program to compile it, it reads from every single line. So it basically is a set of instructions. It'll start at the first line, read everything on it, start at the second line, read everything on it, and then it needs to have a stopping point as well. And we'll get more into that later in the episode. I just wanted to give that basic rundown. It does read every single line. So the first off, I wanted to show what comments are, how you can comment out lines of code for the compiler to just skip over, and that's with the // here. And what this does is it again makes the compiler just kind of skip over that code, so you can add stuff here. So this is like the beginner C++ beginner tutorial. That's part 1. Code structure. Now, say I wanted to add another line here. If I were to start typing, well, that doesn't work, because see how the compiler is kind of picking it up? It's not green. Well, you can do two things. You can either do // and then continue on for the next line and the next line, or there's what we call block commenting. And how this works is it's just signifying a block of text that you want to comment out. And you do that by a single / and then the asterisk key, and that'll block out the code. And I can come way down here and start writing stuff. Well, if you want to end that comment, you do an asterisk and then a / again, and that ends the comment of code. So that's how you can have multi-line comments without having to do the // all the time. And that makes things rather simple. For now, I'm just going to stick with this, and this is Code Loop Academy. Now, now that we know what comments are, we're going to move on to a simple program, and I'm going to explain all of the different punctuation and syntax in this program as we go forward, and we'll cover all the other topics more in depth as we move on throughout this tutorial series, because a lot of them are fairly complicated. Now, first off here, we have a hashtag, or a pound symbol. Most people know it as hashtag nowadays. And then we use include. And we're going to do opening and closing brackets. So that's the arrow brackets. And then inside that, we're going to say Iostream. Now, what this is a preprocessor directive. It's how the compiler knows that this needs to be run before any of the rest of the code. And the way C++ works is, the reason it's such a fast language is it doesn't have all of the functionality built into it like JavaScript or other programming languages. You have to actually include this functionality by using these includes, and they just basically load a file or another source code in memory, and you can pull functions out of there or use bits from that code. Now, another thing, and we're going to cover this more in depth in the future, but this Iostream here, it's just the word Iostream, and the reason this is because it's actually a C++ class. Now, say we wanted to pull a class from the C programming language, because C++ is built off of the C language and then refined from there. So we can use include. Now I'm going to use like the standard library. There is a C class called the standard std lib. Now I can't just leave it like this. It won't work. I either have to put .h at the end of it, or I have to put C in the front of it. So that's C std lib. Most of the time I will use .h, but keep in mind that if there's a .h afterwards, that is a C class that I'm calling in, and if there is nothing afterwards, it's actually a C++ class. So we called in Iostream, and that is the input-output stream, and it allows us to do some simple functionality using input and output for the computer. And we'll get more into that in episode 3. To begin with here, we're going to use namespace. So we're going to say using namespace std, that's the standard library, and we're going to get more into namespaces later as well. For now, just know that to use any of the standard library functions, you need to include the namespace. And then we're going to say int, which is a variable that we'll get into next episode, main. And this here is a function, and I could go on and on about functions. We're going to have a couple episodes later on talking solely about them, but every computer program needs to have an entry point. This is a point where the program actually starts and knows what to do, and that's the function main. And it is standard to use an integer variable for the function main, and what this means is that this function will return an integer. And we're going to get more into that later. And since we already know that it needs to return an integer, we're just going to write return 0. And we're going to have this at the bottom of our code, and what that's going to mean is that it's going to return the 0 integer to the function. And we're going to get more into that later. It's a pretty long topic to teach and quite complicated. Now, we want to print something out to the screen. Well, we can do that by using a command. It's called cout. Another thing to mention, that in between our functions we have these curly braces opening and closing, and that's how the compiler knows that this is the end of our function. So we're just going to use cout, and then for cout, that's seeing out into the console, so we're writing stuff to the console. We're going to use these less than symbols here, and then we're going to use parentheses, and we're just going to type hello YouTube. I mean, you can type whatever you want. What this is going to do is it's actually going to print it to the console. And then we just use a semicolon there to end the line of code. Now, a semicolon has to be on most lines of code, and that's how the compiler knows that that line of code is ended. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this using namespace std here and show you that what happens. Now you see that it says cout is undefined. That's because it doesn't know what cout is, because it's in the namespace std. And we're going to get into that in the future. For now, we're just starting. We have to dive right in somewhere, so it can get kind of complicated at first. Well, another thing that we can do here is we can actually just do std and then double colon, and that's going to do the exact same thing as the using namespace. But you would have to do that every time you called the cout command or any other command that's in the standard library. So it is simpler to just type using namespace std, and that'll work fine. Now that program is actually finished, or almost finished. I wanted to show you guys one more thing. If we hit F5 to run the program here, F5 is the key used in Visual Studio, you notice that the screen will flash and then close instantly. Well, that's because what's happening is the computer's reading it and it's saying, okay, I'll write hello YouTube to the console window, and then I'm done. There's nothing else to do, so I'll close the program. Well, we need to make it actually stop for a second so we can read it. So we can use sin.get. And we'll have problems with this command later on, and I'll show you what that is in the next couple episodes. But for now, this works great. If we hit F5, it'll run the program. I can pull it over here. It says, hello, YouTube. And then it pauses for us until I hit the enter key. Once I hit enter, it closes the program, and it's all done. So that's the end of the first part. I know it got a little crazy there. We're going to dive into these subjects a lot more in the coming tutorials, including the cout. Next episode we're going to be covering variables before I fully cover the cout command. Now, cout has a couple more things that we need to know about it, so we're going to do variables first, and then we're going to do the cout command. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to leave your comments if you have any further questions, and I'll see you around.